this or anything else that you have, but thanks for coming. I recently had the opportunity last week to do a small congressional delegation visit to Cameroon, where there's been great violence there being perpetrated in what's called the anglophone region, or the English-speaking region. This has been about 3 years in the making. The atrocities that we're hearing, and thanks to the Friends of Cameroon here back home, the information that they've been able to get, they've supplied to me, tells me it's a real tragic situation that requires more international attention. The purpose of our group going there was to meet with top government officials to learn more on the ground, but to really foster a dialogue of peaceful reconciliation without preconditions in order to end the violence that's happening in the northwest and southwest provinces of Cameroon, or the anglophone, English-speaking region. Some of the atrocities that we've been hearing, both through our Friends of Cameroon, the mayor, some of the contacts that we have with our sister city relationship of Kumbo, which is located pretty much in the center of the northwest province, has been nothing short of horrifying. From mass executions to they've weaponized the use of fire to whole villages being razed. And this is being perpetrated primarily by the Cameroonian government and their security forces that have come in to crack down on what was initially peaceful protest when it came to the appointment of French-speaking teachers and lawyers and judges in an English-speaking area. You can imagine the type of problems that would create. But nonetheless, we did have access to most of the top government officials, most of the ministries of the Cameroonian government, except for President Biya himself, who's been in power since the early 80s. He unfortunately took off to Geneva the day before we were set to meet with him. I don't know if that was coincidental or just a way to avoid this congressional delegation who was coming to deliver what we thought were going to be honest and frank conversations with him as leader of the Cameroonian government. So over the last few years, again, we've had the executions, beheading, rape being used as an instrument in this conflict. Again, homes and villages being burnt to the ground, young mothers grabbing their young children, fleeing into the bush. We have over 500,000 displaced people now from these regions. Some have moved internally in country, others have escaped into Nigeria or found other places of safety and refuge. But for whatever reason, the international community wasn't paying much attention to this at all. So the purpose of our trip was try to elevate that. Had a chance to meet with the diplomatic corps in Cameroon, all the other ambassadors from around the world, to encourage them to speak up and speak out against the violence being perpetrated there. And but especially having a chance to meet with the defense minister, the head of what's called the Beer Security Force, which is a well-trained fighting force that we've worked with in combating Boko Haram, which is establishing a strong presence in the northern part of Cameroon and throughout this region. So where do we go from here? I went over with Karen Bass, who's the chair of the subcommittee in charge of African Affairs, along with Jim Sensenbrenner, one of my colleagues here in Wisconsin. We have recently introduced a bipartisan resolution that we anticipate bringing up in Congress here in July that calls for the end of the violence, calls for a peaceful dialogue without preconditions, so that there is reconciliation in this country again, and so that the fighting and the bloodshed stops in the anglophone region. We also have additional tools at our disposal. We have teamed in the past with training and security assistance with especially the Beer forces to the north in combating Boko Haram. Recently, earlier this year, because of the human rights violations that we feel that the Cameroonian government was perpetrating in this region, we pulled back on a lot of that security assistance. We've demanded and actually written that none of the training or equipment, supplies that we're providing to the security forces in the battle against Boko Haram can be used in any way, shape, or form in these provinces where the internal fighting is occurring. We also provide a lot of federal aid in combating HIV and the spread of HIV in Cameroon. We had a chance to visit one of the HIV hospitals right in the capital, and they're doing amazing things with that right now, and I'm sure they don't want to see that curtailed in any fashion. And then finally, we give them a trade preference under what's called a GOA that makes it easier for them to be able to export some of their product into the United States. We have the power in Congress to ask for a review of that trade status with Cameroon, especially in light of known human rights violations, and that's another step that we are considering right now, again, to get President Biya and his government's attention, that There are members of Congress who care. We are watching very closely. We are demanding a peaceful dialogue and an end to the violence immediately, and then some reconciliation and accommodation to the concerns that people in the anglophone region of the Northwest and Southwest are raising, which I think are legit and need to be resolved and heard by the government. A few of the people we had a chance to meet. I'm sure our friends group here in La Crosse will recognize a few of the faces. Sister Kathleen has been here in La Crosse on a number of occasions, and she was able to come again from Kumbo in order to be with us in the delegation along with these other gentlemen from the region. This is one of the bishops of Bamenda, which is the capital of the Northwest province, and all of them were there to offer their testimonial firsthand of what they are seeing, what they are accounting, what they are experiencing in their own neighborhoods and their own community. And I thought it was very helpful for our congressional delegation to hear directly from them, having just traveled the last day to be with us. And then finally, I had a chance to meet with some of the Cameroonian students who actually have had a chance to go to school here in the United States. This young lady, again a resident of Bamenda, which is the Northwest province, was actually a Nelson Mandela scholar going to school for a summer up at Stout. This gentleman here from Kumbo, our sister city, went to school at North Carolina. He's currently had to escape to the capital to avoid the violence back home. He's studying engineering. This gentleman was going to school at Notre Dame. And so these are all very bright, incredibly promising young Cameroonians looking for a better way of life, and yet all of them now are in the middle of this region that's experiencing these atrocities and the conflict. And again, being able to hear directly from them what they are seeing on a day-to-day basis and what they are encountering was incredibly powerful for our entire delegation. More work needs to be done. Time is of the essence, and only time will tell just how responsive the Cameroonian government will be to our demands when we were there. We certainly intend to be following up with the contacts that we have now made. I'm certainly thankful that we have such a strong Friends of Cameroon here in La Crosse who's been able to provide me information from what they are hearing from their contacts. And somehow, some way, not only do we need to elevate this issue in the halls of Congress and on the floor of Congress, but throughout the entire international community. So hopefully progress will be made to end one of the more silent atrocities that are being committed on a day-to-day basis that the rest of the world really doesn't know all that much about. So that's our task for moving forward, and I want to thank Sister Eileen and Lee especially for getting me involved in this charge and this responsibility, and I'm glad I found time in order to get over there. It's a long trip. For those of you who have been, there's no easy route into Cameroon either, but I thought it was important for a group of us in Congress to spend time there for at least the 5 days in which we were over there, and especially given the access that we have with some of the big decision makers within the country. We do have a terrific UN ambassador who we spent all 5 days with too, who's doing yeoman's work right now in elevating this issue himself and delivering the stern messages that President Biya and his government need to be hearing from the United States of America. So I think we are being very well served in the U.S. Embassy and the task that they have assumed in trying to elevate this crisis and find some resolution to it as well. So with that, Sister Eileen, Lee, do you have anything you care to add or mention at this time?
We're just really grateful that actually we have a government that is responsive to the call of the people. We've been with our Cameroonian brothers and sisters for over 20 years in different ways with the Franciscan Common Venture, and then all of the network of relationships that have developed through the Friends of Cameroon. And so we live in a world where we're quite interconnected, and we know that in different ways. And you're right that one of the things that stands in my memory is early on in the crisis, a priest was written, or I read what a priest wrote, and he said, will the international community need to wait for a genocide to look at us again? And of course, there have been plenty of genocides, in the past in Africa, and we're really committed that another one doesn't happen in Cameroon, although plenty have died and many are suffering. So we're grateful that that our government and you leading this way are pointing the light so that we can take a look at this. And we're praying that, you know, the conscience of the world will intervene for peace.
Great. Lee, anything to add?
Well, it saddens us when we went there in 2016 and earlier in the year, and that was the sister city official visit, and they showed us so many different things. And it was later in that very same year when this whole
October
crisis started.
16.
Yeah. And it just saddens us to see where it is now today. But we're hopeful and encouraged with your leadership and others from the government. We think steps like this can make a difference. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Well, we hope so. Again, overriding message, peaceful dialogue without preconditions, end the violence immediately, and let's resolve this. And if they don't, I think the United States, with the work of Congress, we have tools that they will care about, whether it's security assistance to the north that they rely upon, the fight on HIV, trade relations. They do pay attention. I'm surprised that even when we had a subcommittee hearing about the crisis in the anglophone region, it was amazing how much coverage it was given in Cameroon. They knew what Congress was focusing on and talking about, so hopefully we got their attention. Any questions?
What were some of the conversations, obviously you mentioned with the representatives, are they on the same page as what you were kind of talking about, their concerns? Was there some pushback? Or?
No, the bipartisan delegate, no, we're all on the same page.
As far as the country, the Cameroon representative.
Yeah, there's no daylight separating. We're gonna have a good bipartisan resolution coming up in Congress this month, again condemning the violence and calling for peaceful dialogue. And no, we've taken a very firm, I think, affirmative bipartisan statement in Congress that we want to see this violence ended, while also appreciating the unique role that Cameroon has throughout that region when it comes to Boko Haram and some of the spread of that influence too.
But as far as the Cameroonian representatives, were they receptive to your, I guess, concerns? Is there work to be done as far as the relationship in that?
Well, you know, there's always the saying, trust but verify. We had a lot of positive comments that they don't like the violence either. They tend to blame it more on separatist groups operating in the anglophone region, trying to stir up trouble and trying to carry out reprisals against their own neighbors who they feel are too sympathetic to the Cameroonian government, and that's why the security forces have to come in. But we think they're overstating the case, that as a government, their first responsibility is the safety and the security of all their citizens. And that's where the responsibility lies, and so that's why we were directing our attention to the Cameroonian government.